Hello guys, this video is over prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, the structure and the function of each. So make sure you're taking your C notes and we will work with your C notes in class. So here we go. Alright, prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. All living things can be divided into two groups. So prokaryotic cells are simple cells. These cells can be found in bacteria or blue algae. Okay, remember they are single-celled organisms, which means they only contain one cell. Eukaryotic cells are more complex. Eukaryotic cells can be single-celled organisms, such as protists, or composed multicellular organisms, such as humans. So all multicellular organisms are composed of eukaryotic cells. Remember, if you can see it, it is a multi-celled organism. So if you can see it with your own two eyes, it is multi-celled. It has to have millions of cells for you to be able to see it. Alright, the major difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells is that eukaryotes contain a well-defined nucleus surrounded by a nuclear membrane, and prokaryotes do not. So remember we would say eukaryotics make you or have a nucleus and pro equals no. So that's how you tell them apart. Eukaryotes also contain a membrane-bound organelles that have specialized functions. Prokaryotes do not have this. Alright, both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells contain a cell membrane, and they also have a plasma membrane. The cell membrane allows passage of materials in and out of the cell. Prokaryotes and eukaryotes also contain cytoplasm, which is the fluid inside the cell membrane. Alright, both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells contain DNA material. The DNA of a eukaryotic cell is organized into rod-shaped structures called chromosomes. These chromosomes are contained in that well-defined nucleus that we talked about in the last slide. The DNA of a prokaryotic cell is organized but into a circular segment. This circular DNA winds and twists so that it may not appear to be a perfect circle. Some prokaryotes also contain small segments of circular DNA, and we call these plasmids. And these contain or can enter and exit the bacterial DNA. The circular DNA and plasmids are found within the cytoplasm, not within the nucleus. Because remember, they don't have a well-defined nucleus. Alright, both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells contain ribosomes, which are sites of the essential process of protein synthesis. Remember, when something is synthesized, it's made. So this is where proteins are made. Ribosomes are composed of RNA, which contains DNA as a template to make the proteins. In eukaryotes, ribosomes can either be free in the cytoplasm or nestled and transported along a series of channels called the endoplasmic reticulum. Remember, we talked about smooth ER and rough ER in 6th and 7th grade. So the rough ER is going to have the ribosomes on them. In prokaryotes, there is no endoplasmic reticulum, so the ribosomes just flow free through the cytoplasm. Alright, all prokaryotic cells contain a cell wall. Remember, we talked about that some eukaryotic cells do contain a cell wall and some don't. The ones that do are plants, fungi, and then some protists. The cell wall functions to protect the cell. However, the cell wall structure is different between a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell. Eukaryotic cells contain carbohydrate cellulose. Okay, so the cell wall is made of a carbohydrate. In prokaryotic cells, the bacterial cell walls are composed of amino acids and sugars, and they form a complex system called a peptidoglycan. Alright, some prokaryotic cells and some eukaryotic cells have flagella, which are long hair-like structures on the surface of the cell that aids in locomotion. Remember, we said locomotion is movement. Flagella are found on some bacteria and some protists called euglena. The human sperm cell also has a flagellum for propulsion. The actual structure of the flagella differs slightly in prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, but the function is the same. All right, so the differences between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells, being the simplest type, do not have specialized structures or organelles that are found in eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells contain a nucleus, which acts as the control center and houses DNA. This well-defined nucleus is surrounded by a nuclear membrane, sometimes called a nuclear envelope, and we'll talk about that a lot when we talk about how cells divide. Eukaryotic cells contain mitochondria, which act as the powerhouse of the cell. Many of you have heard it called the mighty mitochondria because it's the energy source. These mitochondria are sites of ATP synthesis, an essential molecule in cellular respiration. So when we talk about cellular respiration, we will talk about ATP. Eukaryotic cells contain the Golgi apparatus or Golgi bodies, which is a storage area and packages substances. Remember, we talked about them kind of being like UPS in your other grades. Eukaryotes contain lysosomes, which is the part for cellular digestion of large particles. Some eukaryotes contain plastids, which contain food or pigments. You've never heard the word plastids before, but we've talked about how chloroplasts contain chlorophyll for photosynthesis. So chloroplasts are actually a plastid. Although some prokaryotes contain chlorophyll, this chlorophyll is not contained in a membrane-bound plastid. All right, eukaryotic cells are more complex than prokaryotic cells. This complexity gives eukaryotes an evolutionary advantage. The chromosomal organization of the DNA material enables mitosis and meiosis to occur. This is cell division, which leads to genetic variation. Mitosis is a prerequisite for the evolution of multicellular organisms. So remember, we talked about how eukaryotic cells, they divide and they make new cells. We also talked about how when you pass on your genes, you only pass on half, and this allows for a greater variation. We talked about this in the 7th grade. This does not mean that prokaryotic cells will be replaced by eukaryotic cells. These prokaryotic single-celled organisms are well suited for their environment and their niche. These cells have been around for a very, very long time. They were the first cells we believe that were around. So they will survive. They just don't have the genetic variation that eukaryotic cells have. All right, so what are you going to do now? You're going to go back through your notes. You're going to circle all your keywords. These are your vocabulary type words. And you're going to underline the main ideas. So make sure you have these done in class so that we can talk about them and do your questions when you come to class. Have a great day.